Hey everyone, it's Jessica with Montana Family Pharmacies. Today I am with Aimee, and she is an occupational therapist and owner of Blue Skies Pediatric Therapy in Billings. This month is Autism Awareness Month and Occupational Therapy Awareness Month. I wanted to get a little bit of information out about autism and especially early signs of autism so that you or somebody you know who might have some concerns can decide if they need to get further evaluation done on their children and what resources there are out there to help them. And we'll go in a little bit too about what occupational therapy does to help these kiddos and these people. So Aimee.
Yes.
Maybe we can just start with what are the signs that you should look for in maybe 2 and younger, what people can sort of...
Usually kids don't get diagnosed with autism until they're age 4 or 5, but you can see signs as early as 18 months. Sometimes 6 months. There was a study done for 6-month-olds about whether or not they responded to their name, and they could look at that as a reliable factor of whether or not they would be diagnosed later with autism. So at 6 months, you should be able to call your kid's name, and they should at least be able to turn and kind of try to locate you. They should be able to smile at you and respond.
Okay.
So what you're looking for is for them to be interested in you, in your face. So between ages 6 months to 9 months and then up to 12 months, they should be more interested in people than objects. So they should be checking out your face, and they should be imitating your smiles, and they should be trying to clap with you, and they should be giggling with you, and really having that interaction. Little kids with autism, little infants, they tend to be more interested in objects, or they'll look away from you and look this way and that way, everything except you. So they're not really interacting with you.
Okay.
They should also be responding to little simple games like patty cake, or playing little hide and seek, peekaboo. They should be anticipating that. Children with autism don't show any interest in that. Also, communication is a big one. That usually is the biggest red flag first that parents will notice. They'll be slow to develop language, if at all. Typical child should be babbling fairly early, making sounds and trying out different sounds. They should be trying to put 2 words together or put 2 sounds together to make a word. By 16 months, they should be using gestures. So they should be pointing at what they want. They should be doing things like up when they want up. Children with autism aren't doing that. They're not showing that initiation for communication. They're not babbling and having different sounds in their repertoire. Not every 16-month-old is going to have really clear words, but they're going to have approximations. And if they haven't by 18 months, if they're not increasing in their babbling and they're not using different words, then you're going to start doing things like a speech evaluation and looking at possibly getting evaluated for autism. They tend to like routine. So a typical child can be pretty flexible if their routine changes, like say your bedtime routine changes. Some parents have a pretty set routine of where, they give them after dinner, they give them their bath, they read them a book, and they go to bed. And life happens, and the routines don't always happen. So a typical kid can be pretty flexible about that. A child with autism is going to get really upset, and they're going to want to keep that routine set. They like to have predictability in their environment.
Because they don't really know how to communicate.
They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to adapt. So they want to know what's coming next. A lot of kids with autism have sensory issues. So you might notice at, say, 16, 18 months that they're not liking certain foods, that maybe they're gagging on foods. They're sticking with very simple foods. Maybe they don't like different textures. Maybe they don't like soups like a beef soup that will have vegetables and noodles and beef, those different textures all in one. They can't manage all those different textures in their mouth, so they'll stay away from those kinds of foods. They might have some sensitivity to sound, so they might get really upset when somebody's mowing the lawn or the vacuum cleaner's going or the blender goes. Anything unexpected, they might hold their hands over their ears and cry. Some typical kids can have some sensitivity, but if you let them know it's coming and they kind of get used to it, they get over it. But a child with autism doesn't get over it. Their system gets an overload. You'll also know some kids with autism tend to withdraw, and some of them tend to have meltdowns. So they might be described as a really fussy baby or a really fussy toddler and just kind of unpredictable.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of times parents get blamed as being not very strict, not having good discipline.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate. I've had more than a few parents tell me that their relatives, grandparents or aunts and uncles, will tell them, you're just not strict enough with your child, or you're babying your child, and that's not it.
Right.
Their child is an overload. And a lot of our children with sensory processing delays get caught in that fight or flight mode. Like that's, if you think of like the deer in the headlights, that's your kind of your freeze or your fright. Children with their nervous system can get into that really quickly if they get in sensory overload. And so that's what you see with those tantrums. And they're not really tantrums, they're meltdowns. So there's a difference. A tantrum is a behavior based of, I want to get something. A meltdown is, my system got overloaded and it's freaking out.
Right.
And they're not really controlling it. A lot of kids don't even remember having them or why it happened.
So. Yeah, and in the last time we were talking, you were saying how sometimes they'll like hit and they'll kick and they'll bite or whatever, and they don't even remember doing that, which I actually found really interesting because that just happened with my son recently, where an issue happened with some kid and they were playing and he got overloaded and upset and whatever, and he swore up and down that he didn't remember hitting the kids, and I honestly didn't believe him. I thought he was just at this point, because he's older now, I thought he was just trying to not get in trouble or whatever. And he did finally say, I might have hit him once, but it sounded like he actually hit them repeatedly.
Yeah.
And so he didn't even remember, which I found really interesting that you said that is the case. So
yeah. Well, and that fight mode comes in. They just want to get away, and they want to get away from whatever the sensory overload is. And so they might hit, they might kick, they might run away. And we make the mistake as adults by getting them and going, well, why did you do that? And they can't tell you because they don't know why. Their system just went into overload mode and just instinctual, and they're not controlling that. It's not a voluntary thing.
Right.
And unfortunately, kids will get disciplined for something that they don't even remember doing or couldn't control.
Right. Yeah. And then with the younger kids too, I guess from probably not 6 months, but maybe like more the toddler age, like they also probably, at least in my experience, which again, my son hasn't been diagnosed with autism, but he has the sensory issues. So is those really long meltdowns. Like,
right.
He would have really long, hour-long meltdowns after certain things would happen. Like he went to a daycare that was just a little bit too busy for him for a little bit. And so for those couple weeks that we went there, it was like an hour long crying on the floor, upset, no consoling, nothing I could do to help. At the time I thought, well, he's 2, but now I've learned more, and
right.
I think that's one of the things that's hard to distinguish too, is like what's normal, quote unquote normal.
Right, and what's not.
Yeah.
And well, a meltdown or a tantrum, as people usually label them, that lasts for 30 minutes to sometimes an hour, and they're unconsolable. There's nothing you do, even if you offer them the moon or, hey, you want, a lollipop or something like that. If they're in a true meltdown stage, they're not going to care. It's not going to work. And that's kind of how you tell a little bit of the difference. Usually the tantrums will start because, say, they got told no, they couldn't have a toy. So then they'll act out, versus it just happens and you're not quite sure why are they screaming and crying on the phone or crying on the floor. And I just said, how was your day?
Right.
Or offered, to give them a toy, or I tried to play with them and they freaked out on me.
Right.
That's usually a meltdown. And unfortunately, a lot of this sensory overload is a cumulative effect. So it's not just this one event happened and now my child's in meltdown. It's something that could have started 3 hours earlier, like they were at the daycare. That was too overloading, and maybe another kiddo was having a hard time at the daycare and they were crying on and off for all day. Well, your child who has some sensory issues might be trying to hold it together throughout the day, but they're slowly building up like a volcano. And then they get home into their safe place
and let it all out.
And let it all out, and you get to take the brunt of it. And it's like the volcano overflowed and erupted, and you're not quite sure, I just offered to give you a hug,
Right, yeah.
asked you how your day was. So you have to, unfortunately, look back at the preceding events and try to figure it out from there. But sometimes you don't always do that. I mean, you can't figure it out.
Yeah. And sometimes I try to also think about, or when I'm trying to explain it to people, it's like, we get edgy, we get, neurotypical people have things happen throughout the day, and it makes us edgier and edgier and edgier.
Right.
And we don't get that sensory overload like they do.
Right.
And also they're children, so they have no tools for managing it.
Right. They don't just magically teach themselves tools on how to cope.
Right.
They learn it. And some kids, if you have sensory delays, or if you are on the autism spectrum, you take a lot longer to learn. It's harder to learn those tools because you don't always have a good sense of how you feel inside and what those feelings in. Like, if I have autism, I might not understand what it feels like to be hungry. That those internal cues that we would interpret as, say, hunger, they might not know what that is.
Right.
And they might not accurately interpret it. So we have to help them. We have to teach them that feeling inside, say that frustration that you're feeling, that's what frustration is. And here's what we can do about it.
If somebody has suspicions that their child has autism or needs to be tested for it, what are the steps that they should take?
Well, first, we have the World Wide Web, which is great. So you can definitely get tons of information off of the internet. There's the Autism Navigator, which will go through 16 signs of what a typical baby or toddler should be able to do for, I think it's 24 months and younger. And then they will kind of contrast it to autism, and you can look at that. The thing to remember when you're online looking is that don't read into some of that too much, because you can scare yourself really easily.
Yeah.
As far as like sensory, everybody has preferences. So your child might not like beef stew because they think it tastes gross. So don't go get a referral from your pediatrician or go into your pediatrician and say, my kid hates beef stew, or doesn't like to eat carrots. Look at clusters. So clusters of symptoms. So my kid doesn't respond to their name, and they're 10 months old. Now that they're 12 months old, they're not gesturing. So you look at multiples, not just one. And then if you have any concerns, I would go to your pediatrician and voice those concerns. And I would not, speaking as a therapist who's been doing this for a while and as a parent, I would not take no for an answer. A lot of pediatricians or family practice, unfortunately, don't want to jump the gun and make assumptions, so they'll use the wait and see method. And early intervention is the key at this point. Research is showing that the earlier you can get your child in for interventions, the better the prognosis is. Now, you don't have to have a diagnosis of autism to get things like speech therapy and occupational therapy and behavior therapy if that is warranted. But if you get at least a referral to get those services, and then say you're getting intervention and you find out, a year down the road or whatever, that everybody agrees, okay, we should probably give the autism diagnosis, or we should at least test for it, that's fine. But if your child is showing some of these symptoms, don't wait and see 6 months to a year down the road. Don't wait until they're 3 or 4 to get intervention when you knew at 15 months that there was something off.
Right.
A lot of parents, and it's moms in particular, will tell me that they knew something was different about their child early on, that they just had this gut feeling, and everybody told them everything was fine, and just wait, that they'll catch up. Follow your gut instinct and push it. Worst case scenario is you get evaluations by these other professions, and they tell you everything's fine and you're on track. There's nothing wrong with getting an evaluation.
Right.
So I would start with your family practice or your pediatrician and ask for a referral to the other services. And make sure that when you go to these services that you go in with them. So don't go to a clinic where they take your child into a back room and you have no idea what they're doing. You want to be participating, especially for the little ones, because you have them the rest of the week.
Right.
You are going to follow through with all of those strategies, and you need to know what to do.
Right.
And then you need to be able to ask all your questions. So always go in, and if you happen to run into a clinic who doesn't want you in, it's not a good fit, and I would go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think just autism in general has gotten a lot of press. It's become the ADHD that was 20 years ago. But I think too, some people hear the word autism and it's this big woo voodoo kind of diagnosis. And I think that it's not as scary as it used to be. I think we have better tools. And to note that autism, it's a spectrum for a reason. That there are some kids who are what we call high functioning autism.
Right.
And they're going to have maybe some difficulty with social skills throughout their life, but they're going to learn how to navigate those, and they're going to be healthy and productive adults, and they're going to be happy. There are some kids that are much more severe and significantly delayed, but there are also tools to help them as well. So I wouldn't think of it, the diagnosis, as like a death sentence.
Right.
I mean, I hate to say it that way, but some parents, once they find out that their child has autism, you can almost see that they look really crushed. And it is scary. If there's anything wrong with your child, it's very scary, and you want your child to have the best of everything. But I look at getting that diagnosis from my perspective as a professional is that it's a tool for us, and it helps give us a direction, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how your child is going to live. I mean, how their future is going to be.
Right.
It just gives us a direction for now and gives us some tools on how to address some of their difficulties or some of their challenges.
Yeah. I think for me, in my experience, again, it's not autism, it's sensory stuff, is that it's not, like, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. And then also, it's kind of a hard thing to explain because the child seems normal otherwise. And I think a lot of times people view it as an excuse, or like you're trying to make excuses for the behavior. But like they really have these differences. And in some ways, just as a parent, that's really challenging because they don't look different. So people just think that they're being naughty,
Right.
And they tell you that. And you're like, I can't explain it to you in 5 seconds because you don't know him. And, it's just kind of one of those challenging things and not more challenging than somebody who has a child with other differences and delays and diseases and whatever it might be. But it's just like, since you can't see it, it's really hard. And it's even hard in education. It's hard in lots of different things that I think people sometimes just believe that you're coddling them.
Right. And I think too, as children get older, if they're higher functioning autism, they tend to like to interact with adults. And so the adults will think, well, they sound so intelligent. They're doing so great. Why? I don't see how they could be on the spectrum, but they're not interacting with their peers. And you do get some judgmental strangers who look at you and say, well, your child looks normal and your child is articulate. And how come they're, on the floor crying because they got overloaded by the lights in Walmart or something.
Right.
So there is a challenge with that. My advice, and from what other parents have taught me, is that what helps them is networking with other parents. Because the other parents understand the most. And they can, it's very, I think it was surprising when I first started my practice, and in the waiting room, 2 parents would start talking to each other. And then the next thing you know, a third parent would join, and they're all talking to each other and just being a fly on the wall and just listening to them. They're all sharing stories, and it's bonding for them. And it's very reassuring to them that they're not crazy.
Right.
that there is something going on with the child, and that these other parents have experienced it, and that these other parents have good ways of dealing with it and can help be supportive. And so that in itself is just awesome to see. So I would get on there's Facebook pages now of just communities of parents who have children with autism who can help you navigate. There's some just in Montana that so you can network with other parents who have kids with autism in Montana, and then they get together every now and then, and there's support groups. And I would try not to isolate yourself, because that seems to be one of the factors that really is disheartening for parents, is that they feel isolated, that they don't think that anybody else understands what they're going through, and that's just not the case.
And it's a challenge sometimes to go out and do things because your child's always melting down,
right?
And then you're like,
right. So then you don't go out anymore,
right.
or you don't have anybody to watch your child, so you don't go out on things like date night. So then marriages have a hard time, and then or if you're single, you can't go out and meet anybody because you can't leave your child at home.
Right.
You don't know who to trust, or you can't find a babysitter who is going to deal with their special needs or have an understanding of it.
Right.
So that, the internet is great for that, but if you can join a support group and get in person, that's always best.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good idea. So April is also Occupational Therapy Awareness Month, and so that's what you do, and all of your people here. And so obviously you specialize in pediatric therapy, and that's what we're talking about too. We're talking about early intervention. So I know when I I first had the seed planted into my mind that my child might need occupational therapy, I kind of discounted it at first, because I thought, well, that's just for children who are severely delayed and who need to learn how to tie their shoes, for example, or to button a shirt, or to feed themselves, which those things I think you do. But for my child, that wasn't something that he really needed. So I didn't really understand what you would do to help them. So I guess if you could just kind of go over like what occupational therapy is and what you do to help these kids.
Okay.
Gain
so occupational therapy, just in general, views occupation in a broader sense. So it's not just your career, your profession, or your job. It's who you are, what you do throughout the day to make up you. So it could be your role as a mom, it could be your role as a sister, it could be your role as a photographer or a driver. Whatever you do throughout your day, getting dressed, being able to make yourself food, doing your laundry, getting to the grocery store. As a child, we view occupation as play. That's the main occupation of a child. When they're in school, it kind of transitions to play and school and making friends. It's also getting themselves dressed. It's being able to feed themselves, all those other physical aspects. But we view it in broader terms of whatever a child needs to be able to do to be a kid. So if they have a physical disability, say they're in a wheelchair, it could be learning how to do some of those self-care things. It could be learning how to use a power wheelchair. It could be learning how to access assistive technology. It's a very broad
because there's so much
career,
different.
which is great because then it allows you to specialize too. So you can kind of choose where your area of interest. And for me, it was pediatrics, and I loved sensory processing from the moment I graduated, probably even before I really even knew what it was. So what we do here is we use play to help facilitate the development of motor skills, sensory processing, social skills, turn taking, interacting with other children. A lot of times we will group kids together so that they learn how to take turns, and that they don't always have to be the leader, or they can negotiate with other children when they're playing a game, or they can use their imagination and play together versus playing separately or getting into trouble and fighting. Those playground skills are very important. But we use play a lot for everything. In a way, we kind of trick kids into learning skills. Sometimes children leave here a little bit angry with us because they had to leave. They don't want to go, which is kind of fun in a way. But most of the time they leave happy and they want to come back because they had a great time. But we have taught them something. So we'll also work on getting their core strength. We'll work on shoulder stability, so strengthening up those shoulders. But we'll work on fine motor skills too. We don't sit around and just do handwriting though, because that is super boring.
Right.
But we'll do things like crafts that they're interested in, so they get to make something, but at the same time they're working their fine motor skills. We'll work on eye-hand coordination, which is really important, or getting the two sides of their body to work together. So all of that plays into being a kid. We look at the building blocks. If you look at a pyramid, the base layer is super important. If you don't have that, if that's not solid, everything else falls. And so that base layer is all those motor skills, bilateral coordination and sensory processing and eye-hand coordination, and all of that builds up to like academics, being able to sit in a classroom and to do handwriting and to do academics, but then also to play on a playground, to make friends, to keep friends. All of that plays into it, and to be able to sequence and just to do chores and all those higher functioning skills, it all begins with play and exploring your environment. So that's where we start down that base and we work our way up.
I think that's a really good overview, because I watched you guys play all the time, and they don't even really know that they're being challenged. I think there were times where I think he came away where he was a little bit frustrated, but overall it's like it was just a great time, you know.
Well, and I think it's important too that we typically only work with a child one time a week, so the rest of the week is parents' turn. So it's really important that we share what we know with the parents and help them and give them the tools that they need. So I view it more of a team effort. So we team up with the parents and sometimes with the grandparents too. They're come because these days parents play a very important role with their grandkids. And whoever is their caretakers, that we want all of us to be a team and to be working and doing our best to facilitate any of these skills that need to be developed. So we very routinely consult with parents and get them involved, and we even sometimes go to daycares or we talk to the teachers. So wherever that child is going to be, we want to set them up for success. And sometimes they do leave frustrated, like we try to provide that just right challenge.
Right.
But sometimes we don't always quite gauge it correctly, and they might leave a little frustrated, and then we learn, okay, that was too much, and next time we'll bring it down a little bit. But we want them to feel good about themselves and raise their self-esteem when they can accomplish something.
Right. Yeah. I think actually something just personally that I wish now I want to tell the whole world is that if you have a child who still wets the bed later than they should, that they could potentially have retained reflexes, correct?
Yes.
And there are ways to fix that through occupational therapy. So my son was that case, and I didn't even know, again, I didn't even mention it to you guys. We've been coming here for I think a year at that point, and then I just happened to see something online that said, it was in one of those Facebook support groups, and it was somebody was talking about their 8 or 9 year old that was still, or maybe it was even the same age, and that's why I looked at it, was still was dry during the day but was still not making it through the night. And that child was very upset. They were starting to feel shame because their younger siblings were, and that was what was happening in my house. Like my youngest was just all of a sudden, totally potty trained through the night and everything, and my older child was just really upset that he couldn't make it through. Yeah. And they're, at first you think, well, they just sleep really hard. But then something said on one of those things that like OT may be able to help that. So then I asked you guys, and sure enough, you tested him for more of those certain retained reflexes that impact that. And you did I think a month. It was like a month of therapy. or of that, whatever you guys did. And he has had one accident since then, like in a year and a half after. Yeah. Wow. And so I've actually told, like, I've had a couple people tell me that their kids, you know, are like 7, 8 years old, and they don't have, you know, they may have sensory issues, but they are not like necessarily in
needing
therapy or anything. And so, and I think it's just, you don't even know to ask that question.
No, I think that, and sometimes we don't know to ask it, you know.
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
we'll ask, are they, you know, potty trained and at what age and all that kind of stuff. And then maybe, are they still wetting through the night? But if we see them when they're little and then we've seen them over a period of time and we don't think to ask, are they still wetting at night or has that stopped? And parents just get used to that being kind of their normal.
Right.
And they just kind of take it for granted that there's something else we can do about it. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that we can help out with, that if parents give us the information, then we can kind of tease out what role should we play. You know, sometimes we'll have, we'll refer to, say, a urologist for those kinds of things, or another specialist, and just to rule some medical out. But if that gets ruled out, then we go, okay, well, let's try this. But I think that you cannot give us too much information.
So I wanted to thank Aimee from Blue Skies Pediatric Therapy for spending some time with me and teaching us all a little bit about the early signs of autism and the steps that you need to take to get your child evaluated and to get them into early intervention, as well as sharing with us what occupational therapy exactly does for these children. If you like this information, please share it with your friends and tell them to like our Facebook page or follow us on YouTube at Montana Family Pharmacies. You can find your local pharmacy at montanafamilypharmacies.com.